When I came here, I did a collaborative project with a friend of mine called Nima, and he was using Ableton, and he was working for Ableton at the time. So he knew the software really well, and just by working with him and watching what he did, I basically learned how to use it. And so then when I set up myself, starting to produce basically I figured that all the tracks that I brought with me from New Zealand were not quite good enough, so then I basically started again from scratch, but started with Ableton at that point. So yeah, that was just like a clean changeover. When I came to Berlin, I left Reason behind and started using Ableton. Yeah. I've moved into using a lot of samples. Like most of the melodic elements I sample, but not really directly. Usually just take a sound source and reverse it, tweak it, change its tone. Yeah, I mean, I don't play a lot of stuff in. I would actually like to do more of that, but I can't play piano, so and my setup is about as basic as you can get, I think, for releasing music. It's just basically Ableton, a bunch of plugins, a small keyboard and some monitors. That's about it. No hardware or anything like that. It's not that I'm anti-hardware or anything like that. It's just that I never collected it, never learned how to use it, and don't really have the budget to buy it. So use a fairly basic setup, but a combination. I mean, I still play some things in and make my own melodic hooks and things like that, but a lot of samples as well, yeah. And all the drums are also taken from sample packs, and I quite often cut up loops, take existing loops and cut those and fiddle around with the timing and yeah, just maybe use one drum from a loop or something like that. So yeah. That's sort of my workflow, which I've gotten really used to, and it's quick for me now, and feel like I get good results from it. Yeah. I think I usually start with drums and bass lines. For me, I usually make music for the floor. I don't really make music for much other purpose other than to play in a club. So yeah, I usually start with trying to tie together the kick and the bass, and then get some good snappy top end drums, and yeah, I mean, try to get a groove going with drums. I mean, I think the way that the music's developed has become very groove based. Tracks are quite tracky. There's not a lot of big synth action right at the moment, and so if you can get a really good drum groove even before you add bass, then you can't go wrong really. It's like people have kind of gotten used to the style of being in a club and dancing to groove, and then if you can add a nice subtle hook to that groove, even better, you know. I don't really work in the way that I have things like timing and velocity in mind. It's just more for me as a dancer, like relating to what I would want to dance to. And because I basically make music for the floor, then I try to really hook into some sort of groove. I mean, it's loop-based music, you know, and it's got a. I'll even get up and sort of dance around sometimes, and if the groove is not quite there, then it has to be tweaked. I mean, it's not really. I kind of change velocity and timing instinctively without really thinking about a plan in mind for it. It's just the overall, either like start working with a basically 1 or 2 bar loop and expand that out, get some variation in the drums, but the key of the bass, kick and drum groove is what sort of has to roll along for me, you know. I think a track should have a beginning and a peak and an end. Like I don't make music that's only really tracky and tooly. I try to avoid that. But yeah, I mean the tracks definitely have sections of rhythm elements, and then generally I'll have some sort of hook-based thing, whether that's just a sampled melody or a synth or a stab or some sort of swell. But I like to make tracks that have sections that maybe reach some sort of breakdown, even though it may not be a long breakdown, but then a new element will come in afterwards to sort of keep your interest. I mean, tracks seem to be getting longer and longer. Like a 7-minute track is normal for me to write now, which I would have thought long a couple of years ago. So then there has to be for me something which keeps the interest there. And elements of surprise are always good for the dance floor as well. So yeah. I don't know, just like it's an overall track, but as I say, I'm not working on making an album. I'm not trying to do anything really that's revolutionary, but just they're tracks for the floor, basically, you know. And if people dance, they serve their purpose, basically. I use some of the Ableton tools, like especially the simpler in Ableton, which is the very basic sampler where you can just sort of drag a sample in and play it on a keyboard, and I use that a lot because a lot of, as I say, when I use a lot of samples, that's the easiest way for me to manipulate them. But most of the EQing and processing stuff is done externally. Use a lot of the Waves SSL for EQing, and for bass lines I use the Predator synth a lot. I tend to limit the VSTs. I mean, I've got a lot of them and that I don't use, you know, so I tend to stick with the ones that I know that the results are good and the ones that I know what I'm doing with. But then, yeah, some of the Ableton machines also, but I guess it's a mix, but yeah. As I say, I'm not really massively technically minded, so I'm not out there searching the internet for the newest production machines. I basically stick to what I know, you know. That's the nice thing about getting things released, is that the label looks after professional mastering, and as I said, I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I'm pretty happy to give the bounce to somebody who is a professional to do a master, you know. But I mean, you can get, there's a bit of debate about the quality of Ableton's audio engine compared to Cubase or Logic, and I think there is probably a slight difference in that the final summing and audio processing in Logic or Cubase are maybe a little bit tighter than with Ableton, but I mean, so far I've found that demos are taken up by labels for me basically bounced straight out of Ableton. So yeah, I mean, I think for me that's the acid test really. If a label's prepared to take it and release it, and then it's good enough, you know. Yeah. You're always working on trying to get your sound to sound better, and I've definitely become better at EQing and getting a proper stereo field and getting that proper push in the bottom end and things like that. But I mean, you're always trying to improve and you're always getting better, I think. It also helps having stuff released and you hear what's the difference between your version and the mastered version, and hearing little things which you would do differently next time and then do differently next time. So yeah. I think I've learned most of the stuff through other people, and I don't do a lot of reading really. Sometimes if I'm sent interesting articles or some sort of recommendation to check out, like a tutorial video or something once in a while, but mostly trial and error. I mean, I spend a lot of time just working on my own and trying stuff out. But I mean, I think again, you sort of get a pattern of the way you work, and if that works for you, then you can sort of, it's always a backup for the way that you work, you know. And sometimes you could spend days trying out a new technique and find it doesn't really work any better than the one you've already got. So I'm not really that proactive in terms of learning all the time. I think I learn basically by doing, you know. So yeah. And I mean, in the early days, definitely working with Matt originally, and then when I came here with Nima, I mean, that's where I really learned everything, you know, just by watching other people work. And then I've done a couple of other collaborations along the line with other people and seeing how they do things and bringing that into your studio method.